Why the smartest people choose solitude. Schopenhauer's warning: we live in a world obsessed with connection. Notifications, messages, group chats, social networks, they all scream the same thing: be visible, be available, be connected. We're told that to be happy, we need to be surrounded by people, constantly interacting, always plugged in. But what if that's a lie? Or worse, what if it's a trap? Arthur Schopenhauer, the famously bleak yet brilliant German philosopher, offered a disturbing warning: the more intelligent a person becomes, the more they are drawn to solitude. Not because they hate people, but because they understand something the rest of us overlook, that most of human interaction is noise. And when your mind is built for depth, clarity, and truth, noise becomes unbearable. This video isn't about hating people or becoming a monk in the mountains. It's about asking a deeper question: why did the most brilliant minds in history, from Schopenhauer to Newton to Nietzsche to Buddha, seek solitude not as an escape, but as a necessity? And what does that tell us about the hidden cost of constant connection? Let's start with the paradox: we are more connected than ever, and yet we feel lonelier than ever. How can that be? Maybe it's because we've confused connection with communion. Schopenhauer believed that genuine communion of minds is rare. The most conversations, he said, are merely exchanges of superficialities, shared not to enlighten, but to distract. And once your mind wakes up to the poverty of shallow interaction, you begin to crave something else: silence. But solitude isn't just silence from others. It's space for the self. It's the ability to hear your own thoughts clearly, not the thoughts fed to you by media, trends, or social approval, but your own. And here's the hard truth: most people are terrified of their own thoughts. That's why we fill every moment with stimulation. The moment things go quiet, we panic. Why? Because in solitude, we confront ourselves, not the version we post online, but the one that lingers in the background when no one is watching. And that confrontation can be brutal, which is why so few people choose it voluntarily. But the intelligent person, Schopenhauer argues, does. Because they understand that truth is never found in the crowd. It's found in the quiet, in thinking deeply, slowly, methodically. Imagine trying to read a profound book in the middle of a concert. That's what modern life is like for the thinking mind. Constant noise, constant input, no space to process, no space to reflect. And without reflection, wisdom dies.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone, not scrolling, not consuming, not performing for anyone, but just present with your own mind? What did you find there? Was it chaos, restlessness, or something deeper trying to emerge? Schopenhauer didn't believe that solitude was easy. He believed it was essential. And he warned that the more intelligent a person becomes, the less they can tolerate distractions, gossip, superficial friendships, and the endless race for status. Not because they're arrogant, but because they see through it. They see that most people chase pleasure, approval, and entertainment because they're terrified of their own emptiness. And the intelligent person, rather than fill that emptiness with noise, chooses to face it, to understand it, to transform it into something meaningful. But here's the catch: solitude is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something else. It's the presence of self-awareness, of clarity, of insight. And that's why it's so rare. Because it can't be bought, and it can't be faked. It must be chosen. And once you choose it, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to notice how reactive people are, how much of their identity is outsourced to others, how little of their time is truly theirs. And you start to wonder, what would my life look like if I reclaimed my mind from the crowd? What would I build, think, write, or become if I wasn't constantly performing, conforming, or reacting? That's not an easy question, but it's the question that starts the journey inward. But now some might say, but we're social creatures. Don't we need people? Yes, we do. But Schopenhauer draws a distinction between need and dependence. The intelligent person values meaningful relationships, but they are not dependent on the crowd to define their worth or fill their time. In fact, they often find that solitude sharpens their ability to connect because they've done the inner work. They know who they are. They bring wholeness, not desperation, to the table. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway here. Solitude is not a rejection of the world. It's a preparation for engaging with it deeply. It's not about being antisocial. It's about being authentic. And in a world that rewards noise, choosing silence is a revolutionary act. The noise trap. Why shallow interactions destroy deep thinking. Let's now look at the war you didn't even know you were fighting, the war for your mind. Not in some metaphorical sense, but in a literal, neurological one. Schopenhauer saw it early. The more triviality we engage with, the harder it becomes to think deeply. He didn't live through the age of smartphones, but he predicted its consequences with chilling accuracy. We are drowning in noise notifications, conversations, updates, opinions, and every time we engage with them, we pay a cost. Attention is a finite resource, and when it's spent on the shallow, there's nothing left for the profound. Here's what the noise trap really does. It fragments your mind. It breaks your thinking into pieces so small that none of them can form anything meaningful. It makes depth feel exhausting and distraction feel like relief. But that relief is deceptive. You're not escaping stress, you're escaping clarity. Every shallow interaction, every meaningless scroll, every socially obligated conversation about nothing, it's not neutral. It's subtraction. It takes away from your ability to sit with a single thought long enough for it to mature, to evolve, to become something worth saying or doing. Schopenhauer warned us long before the rise of digital noise that most people simply don't think. They react. They regurgitate. They reflect the surface of the world back to itself without ever diving beneath it. And the danger of living among the reactive is that they will always mistake slowness for laziness, solitude for weirdness, and silence for ignorance. But in truth, those are the breeding grounds of wisdom. Yet they are also the first casualties of a life dominated by noise. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you had an uninterrupted hour to think? No messages, no music, no multitasking, no passive consumption, just you, a thought, and time. For most of us, the answer is embarrassing. Because we've been conditioned to treat silence as a void, not a canvas. But here's the philosophical pivot. Silence is not emptiness. It is potential. It is the space where thinking is born, where ideas form, where identity is shaped. And when we fill that silence with noise, we are not just avoiding boredom, we are avoiding ourselves. Think about the structure of your day. How often do you choose noise over stillness? How often do you default to shallow interaction just to avoid confronting your own mind? And more importantly, what has that cost you? Because there is a cost. Deep thinking isn't just a luxury, it's a prerequisite for meaning. Every great invention, every philosophical insight, every piece of timeless art began in solitude, in stillness, in thought. Schopenhauer believed that the man who does not love solitude will never love freedom. And here's why. If your mind is constantly influenced by others, by their expectations, their opinions, their distractions, then your life is not truly yours. It's a collage of borrowed thoughts, borrowed values, borrowed goals. You become a mirror reflecting the noise of the world, rather than a lamp generating your own light. And the most tragic part, the noise doesn't just affect your thinking, it reshapes your desires. It convinces you to want things you never truly wanted, to chase achievements that aren't yours, to enter relationships that drain you, to perform instead of exist. And the longer you stay in that current, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. So here's the challenge: reclaim your mind. Not by abandoning the world, but by filtering it. And create space in your day for solitude, not as a retreat, but as a ritual. Protect your attention like it's sacred, because it is. And when you do interact with others, choose conversations that elevate, not dilute. Choose people who challenge your mind, not just entertain your ego. Because at the end of the day, it's not about being alone or social. It's about being awake, and the noise trap has only one goal: to keep you asleep, distracted, docile. But you were not born for that. You were born to think, to question, to create. And that begins where the noise ends. Inner wealth. Why solitude builds the strongest minds. There's a kind of wealth that can't be measured in money, followers, or external achievements. It doesn't sparkle on the outside, and no one can steal it from you. It's the kind of wealth that grows in silence, in stillness, in solitude. Schopenhauer called it the wealth of the inner man, and he believed it was the only kind that truly mattered. What use is a mansion if the mind inside it is restless? Why chase applause if your own thoughts echo with insecurity? In a world obsessed with status, Schopenhauer asked us to look inward and to measure success not by how much we accumulate, but by how deeply we understand. Solitude is the soil where inner wealth grows. It's not just about being alone, it's about making space for the mind to expand, reflect, and refine itself. Without that space, we remain shallow. We skim the surface of our own potential, never diving deep enough to discover what lies beneath. But when you begin to spend time with your own thoughts, something profound happens. The mind starts to organize itself. Ideas connect. Patterns emerge. Questions deepen. And slowly you begin to construct a worldview that is yours, not inherited, not performed earned. But let's be honest, solitude is not glamorous. It's not what gets posted on social media. It's not loud or dramatic or instantly rewarding. It's hard. It's often uncomfortable. You start to notice things about yourself you'd rather ignore: your fears, your contradictions, your desires. But that very discomfort is the beginning of transformation. Because what you confront, you can change. And what you avoid controls you. Schopenhauer believed that solitude was the test of intellectual and emotional strength. Weak minds cannot bear to be alone. They need constant distraction, constant validation. But the strong mind, it seeks solitude not as a punishment, but as a gift. Because it understands that without solitude, there is no self, only noise, only reaction, only a life lived on the terms of others. And here's something we don't talk about enough. Most people don't think they borrow. They borrow their opinions, their beliefs, their goals. And then they wonder why they feel lost. Solitude is the space where you stop borrowing and start building. You ask, do I really believe this? Do I really want this? Or have I just been told to? These questions seem simple, but they are revolutionary. Because the moment you begin to answer them honestly, your life begins to realign. You stop living a scripted life and start writing your own. But solitude doesn't just refine your thinking, it also strengthens your spirit. When you learn to be alone, you become less afraid of loss, less controlled by rejection, less dependent on the approval of others. You become sovereign, and that sovereignty is power not over others, but over yourself. How many people do you know who are emotionally enslaved to the opinions of people they don't even respect? How many are terrified of silence because it reveals how little they've truly built within? Inner wealth is not noisy. It's not performative. It's not about being better than others. It's about being whole, so that when the world is chaotic, you're not. When others panic, you think. When others conform, you choose. That's not arrogance. That's depth, and depth is rare because solitude is rare. But here's the twist. Solitude doesn't mean isolation. In fact, those who have cultivated inner wealth are often the ones who can connect most deeply with others because they bring something real to the table. They're not draining. They're not needy. They don't need to dominate or impress, but they simply are. And that presence is magnetic. Why? Because it's grounded. It's rooted in something deeper than trend or ego. So the question is this: what are you building when no one's watching? What kind of mind are you shaping in the quiet hours? What kind of character are you forming in the absence of applause? These are the questions that matter. Because in the end, when the noise fades and the crowd disappears and all the illusions fall away, what remains is you. And whether that you is hollow or whole depends entirely on what you do with your solitude. Alone but not lonely, the paradox that frees the mind. There's a fear that lurks beneath all our endless scrolling, our constant talking, our obsession with staying busy. It's the fear of loneliness, of being forgotten, ignored, unseen. So we fill our time with people, noise and distractions, hoping that if we're surrounded, we won't feel alone. But here's the paradox that Schopenhauer and countless other great minds understood: you can be surrounded and still feel utterly alone. And you can be physically alone and feel completely whole. Loneliness is not a matter of proximity, but it's a matter of presence with yourself. Solitude, when chosen, is not loneliness. It's liberation. It's a reclaiming of your own mind, your own time, your own being. But most people never discover this, because they never go far enough into solitude to see what's on the other side. They touch the edges of it, maybe a quiet evening, a long walk, a rare moment unplugged, but before they reach the threshold of insight, they retreat. Why? Because it feels empty. But that emptiness isn't a void, it's a clearing. A space where the clutter has been swept away and something new can grow. Something new. But to be alone and not lonely is to realize that your worth does not depend on being seen, that your mind has value even when it's not validated, and that your life has meaning even in silence. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said that the wise person seeks solitude not as an escape, but as a sanctuary. It is not detachment from life, it is deep engagement with the self. And when the self is strong, you stop needing others to complete you. You start to choose them not out of desperation, but from abundance. But let's not romanticize solitude either. It's not always peaceful. In fact, at first, it can feel like a storm. When the noise of the world fades, the noise within rises. You hear your regrets, your insecurities, your unmet desires. That's why most people run from solitude, because it reveals what's unresolved. But here lies the secret. Solitude does not create your inner world, it only shows it to you. And once you see it, you can begin to shape it. This is the paradox of the inner life. The deeper you go into yourself, the more connected you become to everything else. When you slow down long enough to truly hear your thoughts, you begin to understand others more clearly. When you stop performing, you start perceiving. You see the masks people wear, the roles they play, the fears they hide. And instead of judging, you begin to feel compassion, because you've faced your own darkness and survived. So ask yourself, what are you afraid you'll find if you spend a week in complete solitude? A day? Even an hour? What have you buried beneath the noise that might finally speak if you just listened? Schopenhauer's warning wasn't just about the dangers of shallow society, it was about the tragedy of an unlived inner life. But a life so entangled in appearances that the soul never gets to breathe. And his solution was simple, though not easy: step back, be alone. Think. Not because you're better than others, but because you owe it to yourself to know who you are when no one is influencing you, when no one is watching. And when you emerge from that solitude, you're not less social, you're more whole. You no longer enter relationships to fill a void. You bring something real: presence, clarity, depth. You become the kind of person who can stand alone, and because of that, connect more authentically than ever before. So here we are, at the edge of the noise. You can go back, scroll, swipe, distract. Or you can take one quiet step inward, not to escape others, but to finally meet yourself. Because the smartest people don't choose solitude to run from the world. They choose it to understand it, and in doing so they become free.